I'm going to tell you something that should be impossible. While I was clinically dead on an operating table in Boston General Hospital, with no heartbeat and no brain activity for 10 full minutes, I saw the surgical tools they were using on my body. I saw the blue cloth draped over my chest. I saw the clock on the wall reading 3:47 p.m. Here's the problem. I was born blind. I have never seen anything in my entire life. Not colors, not shapes, not light. My optic nerves never developed. And yet, during those 10 minutes when I was dead, I saw everything. And when I came back, I described details to the surgeon, details I had no possible way of knowing, that made him go completely silent. He later told me I'd given him chills. My name is Dr. Sarah Lindholm. I have a PhD in molecular biology from MIT. And before March 14th, 2019, I would have told you that consciousness dies with the brain, that near-death experiences are nothing more than oxygen-starved neurons misfiring in a desperate final symphony. I don't believe that anymore. Let me back up. I've been blind since birth. Congenital optic nerve hyperplasia. My optic nerves simply didn't form properly in the womb. I've never seen my mother's face, never seen a sunset, never seen the color red or blue or any color at all. My entire understanding of the world has been built through sound, touch, smell, and a lifetime of verbal descriptions from sighted people who tried their best to explain what green looks like. I became a scientist because of my blindness, not in spite of it. I wanted to understand the world through something more reliable than human perception. I wanted facts, data, repeatable experiments. The scientific method became my religion, and part of that worldview was a firm, almost aggressive atheism. I believed that when you died, you simply stopped existing. Consciousness was an emergent property of brain chemistry, and when the brain died, so did you. Final, absolute, end of story. I was 42 years old when it happened. It was supposed to be a routine surgery, a cholecystectomy, removal of my gallbladder. I'd been having pain for months, sharp and twisting, like someone was wringing out my insides like a wet towel. The surgery was scheduled for 3:30 p.m. on a Thursday. I remember the smell of the hospital, that distinctive combination of antiseptic, floor polish, and something vaguely metallic I could never quite place. I remember the anesthesiologist's voice, a kind older man with a slight Boston accent, telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 7, and then I was falling. Not physically falling. I was strapped to the table, but falling in a way I can't properly describe. Like the ground beneath me had turned to liquid and I was sinking through layers of reality itself. There was a pressure in my chest, a tightness that felt like someone was sitting on my sternum, and then a sound, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from inside my own skull. What I didn't know at the time was that I was dying. My heart had stopped. An undiagnosed arrhythmia triggered by the anesthesia. Later, the surgeon would tell me they'd worked on me for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of CPR, 10 minutes of defibrillation, 10 minutes where, by every medical definition, I was dead. But I wasn't experiencing death the way I'd always imagined it. I wasn't experiencing nothing. I was experiencing more. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. The gallbladder pain, the chronic back pain I'd carried for years. The phantom ache in my left knee from an old hiking injury. All of it vanished in an instant. And in its place was a lightness, a buoyancy, like I was floating in warm water. And then I opened my eyes, except I don't have functional eyes. I've never opened my eyes and seen anything, but I was seeing. Not through my eyes exactly. It was more like I was seeing with my entire being, 360 degrees of vision all at once. I could see in front of me, behind me, above me, below me, all simultaneously without having to turn my head. I was above my body. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But I was hovering near the ceiling of the operating room, looking down at myself on the table. And I could see myself for the first time. My face, a face I'd only ever known through touch, was slack and grey. There was a tube down my throat. A doctor I later learned was Dr. Marcus Chen was doing chest compressions, his arms locked straight, his face set in intense concentration. A nurse was squeezing a bag attached to my breathing tube. Another was preparing a syringe of something. Epinephrine, I would later confirm. But what shocked me most was the color. I'd spent my entire life having people try to explain colors to me. Red is warm, like fire. Blue is cool, like water. Abstract associations that meant nothing to someone who'd never seen. But now I was seeing them. Not just seeing them, but understanding them in a way that felt primal and ancient. The blue surgical drapes, the red of my blood on the white gauze, the green of Dr. Chen's scrubs. I started crying, though I had no body to cry with, because I was seeing colors I had no names for. Colors that don't exist in the visible spectrum that sighted people see. Colors that felt like emotions given form. There was a color that felt like overwhelming love. Another that felt like pure peace. I still can't describe them. Our language doesn't have the words. And then the room began to change. The walls became translucent, then transparent, then simply irrelevant. And I was being pulled upward, drawn by something I can only describe as a gravity of light. Not a metaphorical light, an actual, physical light that was somehow more real than anything I'd ever touched in my physical life. I moved through what felt like a tunnel, though tunnel isn't quite right. It was more like I was being pulled through layers of existence, each one less dense than the last. And there was a sound, a vibration really, that permeated everything. If I had to compare it to something, it was like the deepest note of a cello, sustained infinitely, resonating through my entire being. And then I emerged into, I'm going to call it a garden, but that word is so inadequate it almost feels like a lie. Imagine the most beautiful place you've ever seen. Now, multiply that by infinity, and you're not even close. There were colors everywhere, the impossible colors I mentioned, but also familiar ones rendered with a clarity and depth that made earthly colors seem like pale shadows. There were structures that looked like flowers, but they were made of light and sound, and they moved with a kind of sentient awareness. The ground beneath me, though I wasn't walking exactly, felt alive. It pulsed with energy, and the air, if it was air, felt like breathing in pure love, like every molecule was infused with an intelligence that knew me completely and loved me unconditionally. I wasn't alone. There were beings there. I hesitate to call them people, because they weren't physical in the way we are. They were made of light, but they had distinct presences, distinct personalities. Some felt familiar in a way I can't explain, like I'd known them before I was born, like we'd planned to meet here. One of them approached me, or maybe I approached them. Space and distance worked differently there. This being radiated a warmth that reminded me of every good thing I'd ever experienced. My mother's hug when I was a child, the feeling of sun on my face on a perfect spring day, the sound of my niece's laughter. All of those feelings compressed into a single presence. And without speaking, there were no words, but there was communication more clear than any conversation I'd ever had. This being conveyed a simple message. You're not done yet. But before you go back, you need to understand something. What happened next shattered every assumption I'd ever made about existence. My entire life began to play out before me, but it wasn't like watching a movie. I was re-experiencing every moment, every interaction, every choice I'd ever made. And I wasn't just experiencing it from my own perspective. I became every person I'd ever affected. There was a moment when I was 19, a teaching assistant for an undergraduate chemistry class. A student, his name was Marcus, different from the surgeon, had come to my office hours struggling with the concept. I remember being frustrated that day. I'd just had a fight with my boyfriend. I was tired. I was short with Marcus. I didn't yell at him, but my tone was dismissive, impatient. I'd explained the concept quickly and basically told him to figure it out himself. In the life review, I became Marcus. I felt his hope when he walked into my office. He'd spent an hour working up the courage to ask for help. I felt his excitement about chemistry, his genuine desire to understand. And then I felt the crushing disappointment when I brushed him off. I felt his embarrassment, his shame. the voice in his head that told him he was stupid, that he didn't belong in science. I felt him leave my office with tears he refused to let fall. And I felt the ripple effects. How that one interaction contributed to him dropping the class. How it added to a growing belief that he wasn't smart enough. How it factored into him changing his major and abandoning a dream he'd had since childhood. The pain of that was excruciating. Not physical pain. This was worse. It was the pain of knowing I'd casually, carelessly diminished another soul. And I had to feel all of it. Every ounce of hurt I'd caused. But it wasn't just the painful moments. There was an interaction with a woman at a coffee shop. I'd been a regular there for years, and there was a barista who always made my coffee exactly right. One day, I took an extra 30 seconds to tell her how much I appreciated her consistency, how it was a bright spot in my mornings. I'd thought nothing of it. In the life review, I became her. I felt her exhaustion. She'd been working double shifts to pay for her mother's medical bills. I felt her invisibility, how most customers treated her like a coffee dispensing machine rather than a person. And I felt the warmth that spread through her when I acknowledged her humanity. I felt how she'd held on to that comment during a particularly difficult week, how it had reminded her that her work mattered. I felt her smile, genuine and bright, for the first time in days. One by one, I relived moments I'd forgotten entirely. The time I'd let someone merge in traffic. They were rushing to the hospital to see their dying father, and those 30 seconds I gave them meant everything. The time I'd snapped at a grocery store clerk. She'd gone home and cried, adding to a depression she was barely surviving. But here's what I realized, and this is the part that changed everything. Every single interaction we have with another person matters. Every word, every gesture, every moment of patience or impatience. We're not isolated beings moving through a random universe. We're part of an intricate web of consciousness, and every action sends ripples through that web. The being of light, still there beside me through all of this, communicated another message. Life isn't a test, it's a school. You're here to learn love, not abstract love, not theoretical love. The messy, difficult, moment-by-moment choice to see the divinity in other people and treat them accordingly. And then I understood something even deeper. The blindness I'd experienced my whole life, the disability I'd sometimes resented, had been a gift. It had forced me to develop empathy in ways sighted people often don't. It had taught me to listen more carefully, to pay attention to tone and emotion. It had given me a particular curriculum in this school of life. But I'd also used my intellect and my scientific training as a shield. I'd hidden behind rationality and skepticism to avoid the vulnerability of connection. I'd treated consciousness as a biological accident because it was safer than acknowledging that every person I met was a sacred, eternal being worthy of love. I wept, truly wept. At the time I'd wasted in defensive superiority. The being conveyed one more message. You have more to do. You have more to learn. And you have more to teach. And then, like a rubber band snapping back, I was being pulled away from the garden. I fought it. I wanted to stay. The peace there was so complete, so total, that the thought of returning to a physical body felt like being asked to put on a suit of armor made of lead. But I was being pulled back anyway. I moved back through the layers, back through the tunnel, back into the operating room where my body was still on the table. I could see Dr. Chen pulling back from chest compressions. I could see the monitor showing a heartbeat, weak and irregular, but present. And then I slammed back into my body. The first thing I felt was pain, crushing, awful, physical pain. My chest felt like it had been beaten with a hammer. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. I couldn't breathe on my own. I was back in darkness, my familiar physical blindness. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, but I couldn't speak around the tube in my throat. It took 3 days before I was stable enough to have the conversation that would change Dr. Chen's life as much as mine. When he came to check on me in the ICU, I asked him, my voice still hoarse, to describe the operating room. I wanted to confirm what I'd seen wasn't a hallucination, wasn't a dream constructed by an oxygen-starved brain. He described it hesitantly, probably thinking I was confused from the medications. And then I told him what I'd seen. The blue drapes, his green scrubs, the clock on the wall showing 3:47 p.m., the exact time I'd later confirm I'd been coded, the small coffee stain on the front of the nurse's scrub top, the particular way he'd locked his arms during compressions. I watched his face, not with physical eyes, but I could hear the change in his breathing, the long silence. "That's not possible," he finally said. "I know," I told him. "And yet," he sat down heavily in the chair next to my bed. "You were dead, Sarah, for 10 minutes. There was no brain activity. You couldn't have seen any of that." But I did. That conversation lasted for over an hour. I told him about the garden, the beings, the life review. I watched a rational surgeon, a man of science like myself, grapple with something that didn't fit into our materialist worldview. He's since told me that my experience changed his approach to medicine. He treats patients differently now. He talks to unconscious patients in the ICU as if they can hear him. Because maybe they can. As for me, everything changed. I finished my cancer research project at MIT, but I left academia 6 months later. I now work with hospice patients, helping them and their families navigate the dying process without fear. I tell them what I saw, what I experienced. That death isn't an ending, but a transition to something more real than this physical reality. I'm kinder now, more patient. I take those extra 30 seconds to acknowledge the barista, the grocery clerk, the stranger on the street. Because I know that every interaction matters, that we're all eternal beings having a temporary physical experience, and the only thing we take with us is the love we've learned to give and receive. I still can't see with my physical eyes, but I see people more clearly than I ever did before. I see the light in them, the same light I saw in that garden. It's always there, even when they can't see it themselves. And I live with the certainty that we're part of something vast and beautiful and loving. That consciousness doesn't end when the brain stops. That this life, with all its pain and difficulty, is a crucible designed to teach us the only thing that ultimately matters: how to love. Not romantic love or sentimental love, but the hard daily choice to treat every person as the sacred being they are. To see the divine in the difficult coworker, the rude driver, the person whose politics you hate. To recognize that we're all stumbling through this school together, all trying to learn the same lessons. I died for 10 minutes and saw colors I can't describe. But what I brought back isn't a description of heaven. It's a blueprint for Earth. We're here to love each other. Everything else is secondary. That's the truth I died to learn. And it's the truth I'm living now.